Before we get started with this morning's presentation, I would like to introduce our speaker to everyone. Dr. Alex Spencer earned his bachelor's and master's degree in modern European history at Pennsylvania State University and got his PhD in modern European history at Auburn University. Currently, he works at the National Air and Space Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian. At the National Air and Space Museum, he curates both the British and European military aircraft and military flight material. His flight material collection contains over 16,000 artifacts. In 1996, Dr. Spencer curated the exhibit, the National Transportation Safety Board. Also, he co-curated the exhibit, The Birth of the Balloon, at the National Museum of American History. In 2016, he was part of the curatorial team for the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall renovation. He was the co-editor of the National Air and Space Museum, an autobiography, in 2010, and the 14th volume of The History of Rocketry and Astronautics in 1993. This year, his book, British Imperial Air Power, the Royal Air Forces, and the Defense of Australia and New Zealand Between the Wars, was published. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to present Dr. Alex Spencer.
Well, Patrick, that was very kind, and thanks so much. And welcome, everybody, and thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to this session. I tend to keep things a little bit more informal, so if there's a question, feel free to jump in. But I thought I'd just start off a little bit by saying that I had the opportunity this week to read the requirements of the badge for collecting that comes from this Boy Scout manual. And I was really actually quite struck by how concise and very good it was done. And in a nutshell, it really kind of just describes what I do for my job during the week at the museum, and boils it down very succinctly and nicely for what you do, or for what I do as what I would call, it's just a fine description of what I would call curatorship. And that's making logical sense of our collections, cataloging them, why we collect them, and things. And I think that's always, that's kind of a good starting point is for the discussion today, is why collect? Why should you collect? Why do we collect it as a museum? And I think it's a simple question, but a really important one. And the thing is that that rather than the written word, the artifact provides us a tangible way to reach back in time to what preceded us, and we can make connections that way, and we can better understand where we are at today from that connection to the artifact. I personally collect things. You can see the background of my home office here is just packed full of books. I've been collecting them ever since I was 12 to 13 years old. I never got rid of a book that I ever purchased. So my house and my office at work are just jam-packed full of books. But I also collect personal artifacts as well. I want to show off one here, a simple glass milk bottle. But this has a very important personal meaning to me, because this milk bottle came from my grandfather's farm. He ran a small dairy farm up in northern Pennsylvania during the 1920s and 30s, and retired out of that in the mid-1950s. And that's the only thing left of the farm. There's no, I could drive past it and see the land that it was on, but for me, that's the only tangible physical object that I have to my grandfather now. And I really didn't know him that well. He passed away when I was fairly young, so I never really had the opportunity to converse with him. So that this object, as simple as it is, has quite important meaning to me. So I think is really the most important reason why we collect. And we do it either personally and or I do it professionally now. So at work, I'm concerned about the history of our nation's aviation infrastructure, importance of where we are at today with aviation, but how we got to where we are today with aviation. And by doing that, I collect the uniforms and flight clothing of the principal participants. I have two kind of categories that I like to go for. One is a very important individual. Dave showed that picture early on in the introduction, and you saw the uniform and medals of General Curtis LeMay, who was one of the major commanders of during the World War II, and also was commanded the bombing raids on Japan at the end of the war, and he was a principal architect of American air power during World War II. So he's a very important figure. That's critical for us to have in the collection. But at the same time, I want to have things in the collection that represent an individual, somebody, an everyday person, somebody that's in that plane going out on missions, and be it the pilot, be it the gunners, the navigators, anything like any individual such as that, that tells the individual story that kind of is a kind of an illustration of the greater whole. You know, one man goes through an event and kind of becomes representative of hundreds, even thousands of people doing that during the war. So those are the reasons I kind of collect at two ends of the spectrum, as I call it, the high end and the low end. So that's really important. And I think the one thing that I find with collecting is that it kind of sparks what my wife and I kind of describe as kind of a joy. It's the hunt. It's going out trying to find that item that we are looking for, that we don't have, that we want to have, and that's always important. If there's anything that I found, I think disturbing is too strong of a word, but that I found, why don't I say problematic with the Scout descriptions, was that they were always talking about the value monetarily of these objects. And I really would like, from a personal standpoint in the discussion today, as I talk to you about this, is kind of steer you away from that idea. And the reason being is, what is the value of something? It can be this, for me, this simple milk bottle is priceless and I would never sell it. And I don't have it because I'm concerned about the monetary value of it. And at the same time, with that said, with the monetary value, who says something's worth something, that something's valuable? If you go into a comic book store and are collecting a comic book and it's $3.99, and that seems like a reasonable price to you, that's great. You spend the $3.99 on the comic book, and you leave the store happy. You found the object that you were looking for. But if you look at the same comic book, 20 years or 15 years from now, and somebody says that it's worth now $250, and you think, well, that's not worth $250 to me. Well, then it's not worth $250. Its value depends on you. And I like to think of it again, kind of like if the object and the price that you pay for it strikes, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's joy to bring it into your home, then it's worth that much money. But I don't look at objects and collecting things as an investment and anticipating like it's a stock market, like the objects going to become more valuable over time. It doesn't. You just don't know if it will or not. It might to some person if they are really into that. And the other thing is it might not. So every once in a while, there's just things that you just keep going from there. So I was for some time I was collecting the GI Joe type action figures, and I no longer was interested in doing that, and so I sold the collection off. And it was like, I don't know if I lost money or made money on it. It didn't matter. I just wasn't getting that what I kind of considered that collector's joy out of it anymore. So, and that's why I stopped doing it. So anyways, I've kind of, and that's where I'm at with this. Yeah, but anyways, with that, I'll get off my little hobby horse with that and go on. So for me, one of the most important things I do day in, day out is bring objects into the collection. I'm trying to beat the bushes sometimes for objects right now. I'm really, I just kind of got permission to kind of go do this, but we have to pursue the collection in a different way. But Charles Q. Brown has become the 4-star general of the United States Air Force. And he's the first African-American to become the head of the Air Force and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he's one of the highest placed generals in the U.S. military now. And I want to go get his uniform for our collection because he's that type of individual that's unbelievably important. Plus, he's made an important milestone for the United States in the United States Air Force. So that's why I'm going to be going after him. But it's, as I said to some of my colleagues, for me to go after a 4-star general, that's a little bit above my pay grade. So we're going to get the director of the museum to approach him. So, but I'll work behind the scenes. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring that collection into the museum one day. So those are the kind of things we do. And what I'd like to do is, if possible, I'm going to show off how we kind of keep track of everything, because this is an important aspect of collecting, is actually keeping track of what you have. That way, if you know what you have, you don't duplicate objects in the collection. And we've tended to do that in the museum. Now, let's see. Let me see if I can do this share screen again here. Let's see here. Share screen, there we go. Can you see that, what's called the museum system on the screen now? Hello?
I cannot.
Okay. This is technical difficulties here for me. Oops. Is that working now?
Nope.
Yes, it's up now.
Okay, it's up now. All right, so what you're looking at right now is the database for the entire collection of the National Air and Space Museum. And I'll just show you quickly how it has. Up in here, up in this corner here, you'll see the number 74,160. That's how many objects we have in the collection of the National Air and Space Museum cataloged at this point of time. Then the other aspect of it that they talked about in your guide to collecting from your scout manual was to give your objects a number, and that's critical as well, because with a number you can get to the object faster sometimes, or else you know when you collected it. So for here, if you look up into the screen's right left-hand corner, you'll see a number A 1971-022, et cetera, et cetera. And that is the catalog. That's how we catalog objects at the museum. The letter is A for an accessioned object or a catalog property object. 1971 was the year that the object was brought into the collection. Let me go to the next record. It'll be a little clearer, I hope. Okay, here's something I'm looking for, and it goes back even further. So starting over again, we have the A for the accession, 1889. That was the year it was brought into the Smithsonian's collection. And then we have a bunch of zeros, and it has 1. That means it was the first object collected by the museum that year. And then finally, the last 3 digits are if an object has numerous parts and pieces and we separate them out from one another, that we give those objects that additional number, so that if one part of the aircraft or object ends up in another building, we can actually keep track of it. And then you can see down here in the lower corner, we have the current location. and it's saying it's at the Udvar-Hazy Center in the restoration hangar right now. So we can keep track of all these things. And then we are obligated to make things as accessible to the public as possible. So by hitting public access on this box here, it'll go up onto the internet, and anybody out there in the world can see that this object is in the collection. And so we go through a whole series of different ways to catalog the object. You'll see here the classification, and if I have a pull down menu here, you'll see all the different classifications that we have, from armament all the way through to art. And we have different classifications of art. And this was pointed out very clearly in your Scout manual on providing different classifications to your collection, so you can make more sense of it. Here we have our craft collection, and we have it split up into aircraft parts, airships parts, balloons, ballooning parts, kites, aircraft parts. So we can keep keep track of things like that. So this object is one of our early steam engines. So it's cataloged as a propulsion object. And we have reciprocating and rotary engines, but we also have jet and rocket engines also in the collection. So these are ways we kind of keep things organized and able to keep things in track. So anyway, so those are some basic things. I'm looking at my time here. I might be going a little over. I tend to do that. So when I get started, but anyway, so those are some of the ways we do things, some of the ways I do my job. And as I say, your Scout manual really was a good primer as to the aspect of how to be a museum curator. You do it on your own. You have your own collections, and make sure that when you are collecting something, what'll make the job easier for you is to make sure that and the reason you're probably doing it anyways is you love the objects, or you're interested in those objects, and then you can become on your own like a little expert on that particular facet of your life, so to speak. And you can tell and teach people about these things, find out more about it, and you kind of work on it that way. So anyways, that's what I have just off the cuff right now. And but I'm happy to take more questions and discuss things a little further if you have anything that you want to know about.
Okay, that was a great presentation.
Oh, my pleasure.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
What is the education required for like doing what you do, collecting things for museums? Like,
sure. I started off as a history major. That's a really good foundation for being a curator because it sets up my knowledge of history and the background like that. There are now what we call museum studies at the museum that people that, let me shut down my screen and I'll stop the share there. And we kind of, our collections people, the people that do the hands-on work are getting degrees now in museum studies that teach the aspect of collections care, cataloging, and things like that. There's a very, very specific collections job called a conservator. And the conservators are very specific. They have very detailed knowledge on how to protect and store objects for the long term. Some of them, my good friend, our chief conservator at the museum, Malcolm Collum, he was interested in large objects, so that was why we hired him. But we have people that are interested in paper and preserving paper, which gets into keeping safe and for the long term documents and books. So there's those people. So you have kind of the historian side of things that I work on, but you also have the objects people that are museums that took museum studies as a major in college, and conservation as well.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
sure.
William Beauchamp asked, what is your favorite part of your job?
Oh, thanks for the question. A good question. The favorite part of my job actually is meeting the people that I'm collecting from. If I'm out for a specific object, or that for the collection that the individual is donating to us, I really just enjoy meeting them and talking to them, because those conversations then become part of the record of the object and the story behind it. And if you go to the museum and you see all of our labels that are uh, talking about the specific objects that's on display, those conversations then become part of the labeling process.
Okay. How many items are needed for something to be considered a collection?
Wow. I don't mean to be flippant, but one, because I only have one milk bottle in my collection, but that's important to me. And then also I collect baseball. I have a baseball card collection where I'm probably up to 900 objects in that one. So I think, wow, I think when you're finally getting into a real collection, probably more than 20 objects, maybe. I'm just throwing that out as an example, because I really don't. I think once you start the collecting process, it grows over time, and and so you find that one object that's of interest to you, then you're like, oh, I wonder if I can find something else that's similar to that, and then it just keeps growing from there. So anyways, I hope that answers. I'm not quite satisfied with
Okay.
my on that one.
Hey, Pat.